She walked in like she owned the world. Chin high, shoulders back. The kind of confidence that came from years of knowing people would bend over backward to please her. Vanessa Harrington didn't ask for things. She demanded them. And tonight would be no different. The restaurant was exquisite, not in an ostentatious way, but in the kind of elegance that whispered power. No golden chandeliers, no glittering excess, just quiet, understated luxury, the kind that only those who truly belonged understood. Vanessa stepped inside, her designer heels clicking against the polished floor, a rhythmic announcement of her presence. She barely acknowledged the hostess, barely glanced at the other diners. To her, they were background noise. She wasn't here to be one of them. She was here to be above them. The moment she sat down, the service began. Swift, polished, and precise. But then, he arrived. The waiter. A man who should have been invisible to her. Just another service worker meant to fulfill her every whim. But tonight would be different. Because in just a few moments, Vanessa Harrington's entire world was about to be turned upside down. And for the first time in her life, she wouldn't be the one in control. If you're curious to see how this unfolds, stay until the end. You won't believe what happens next. And if you enjoy gripping stories with unexpected twists, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Now, let's dive in. Vanessa barely looked up when the waiter approached. Sparkling water. Cold. No lemon, she said, flipping open the menu. And make sure the glass isn't wet from condensation. I hate that. The man standing before her, tall, composed, his uniform perfectly pressed, didn't flinch. Of course, ma'am, he replied smoothly. Would you like to hear our specials tonight? Vanessa exhaled sharply, her impatience barely concealed. Just bring me the list. I don't like when waiters recite them. It takes too long. A flicker of something crossed his face. So quick, so subtle, that most people would have missed it. But Vanessa wasn't most people. She recognized it for what it was. The briefest moment where professionalism overrides pride. She had seen it before. In boardrooms, in negotiations, in the eyes of people who knew they had no choice but to swallow their words. It was a look she had caused more times than she could count. The waiter placed a leather-bound menu in front of her and stepped back. Vanessa didn't thank him. She never did for things like this. Her eyes skimmed the options, her manicured nail tapping against the page. The filet, medium rare, no sauce, and make sure it's actually medium rare. I don't want it bleeding on the plate. She paused, glancing up at him, finally taking in his face for the first time. And I'd like someone more experienced handling my order. The air in the restaurant shifted. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A man at the bar glanced up from his drink. A woman at a nearby table stilled for just a moment. A busboy clearing dishes slowed his movements. The waiter didn't react. His hands remained at his sides, his face unreadable. We have a highly trained staff, ma'am, he said evenly. Your meal will be prepared and served with the highest standards. Vanessa closed the menu with a snap. I'd hope so. Then, just like that, she dismissed him. She picked up her phone, scrolling through her messages as if he had ceased to exist. But the conversation wasn't over. Not yet. The tension in the air was barely noticeable at first, like the faintest shift in temperature before a storm. Vanessa, absorbed in her phone, didn't sense it. Not yet. A few minutes later, the waiter returned, placing a pristine glass of sparkling water in front of her. The surface of the glass was dry, free of condensation, exactly as she had requested. She picked it up, took a sip, then frowned. This is room temperature. The waiter's voice remained steady. It has been chilled to the restaurant standard, ma'am. Vanessa exhaled sharply, shaking her head in irritation. Well, your standard is wrong. Bring me another. Again, that slight pause. Almost nothing. Almost. Then, with a nod, the waiter turned and walked away. This time, Vanessa noticed something. A man sitting a few tables away leaned in toward his wife, whispering something under his breath. A group of women who had been laughing moments before had gone quiet, their gazes flickering toward her before looking away. The energy of the restaurant had shifted, but Vanessa couldn't quite place why. Then, a voice cut through the room. Calm, controlled, but impossible to ignore. "Is there a problem here?" Vanessa glanced up, and her grip on her phone tightened. The man standing before her wasn't a waiter. He wasn't a manager. He didn't wear an apron or carry a tray. He was dressed in a crisp charcoal suit, the kind tailored to perfection. No name tag, no clipboard, just presence. The kind that didn't ask for attention but commanded it effortlessly. Her throat felt dry. "Is there a problem here?" he repeated, his voice smooth but firm. For the first time that evening, Vanessa felt something unexpected. Unease. Vanessa straightened in her seat, forcing composure back into her posture. "I expect a certain level of service when I dine out," she said, her voice clipped. "Your waiter doesn't seem to understand that." The man studied her. His expression didn't change. He glanced at the waiter. Daniel, wasn't it? Then back at her. "I see." Then, in a move that caught her completely off guard, he pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. Vanessa's stomach tightened. Managers don't do that. Owners do. Her fingers twitched against the linen napkin in her lap. "And what exactly was the issue?" he asked. She hesitated. She wasn't used to this. Being questioned, being challenged. Usually, when she made a complaint, people scrambled to fix it. They apologized. They compensated. They groveled. But this man, he was just watching her, waiting. "The water was warm," she said, forcing authority into her tone. "And I don't appreciate being argued with by staff. When I make a request, I expect it to be fulfilled." Silence. Then, slowly, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Tell me, Vanessa," he said quietly. "Do you remember me?" It hit like a slap. The way he said her name, like he had every right to it. Like they weren't strangers at all. A flicker of something surfaced in her mind. His face. There was something about his face. A shape to his features. A certain way he carried himself, but she couldn't place it. Her pulse picked up. "Should I?" A slow, humorless smile. "You should." Then, in one deliberate motion, he unfastened his watch and rolled up his sleeve. And Vanessa's breath caught in her throat. A scar, a faint, barely visible line on his left forearm, but unmistakable. Like ice water spilling down her spine, it hit her. "No." The name left her lips before she could stop it. "Lucas?" His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Close," he said, adjusting his cuff. "Lucas was my business partner, my best friend, the man who built Harrington Industries with your husband, before he was forced out." Vanessa's stomach twisted. She knew the story. She knew it well. Lucas Carter. Brilliant. Calculated. Ruthless when necessary. Her husband had admired him, trusted him, built an empire alongside him, until the moment came when the company was worth too much to share. Contracts were rewritten, promises broken. Lucas had been pushed out with nothing, and as far as Vanessa knew, he had disappeared. Except, he hadn't. He had rebuilt. And now, he owned the restaurant she was sitting in. Feeling the weight of this moment? Let me know in the comments below. What would you do if your past came back like this? If you're as shocked as Vanessa, hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed. Because trust me, this story is far from over. Vanessa swallowed hard, her throat suddenly dry. I didn't realize. Lucas. No, not Lucas. Ethan Carter. That was his name. Ethan leaned back in his chair, adjusting his cuff with a slow, deliberate movement. "Of course you didn't." His voice was even, controlled, but there was an edge beneath it. "You never had to." Vanessa's fingers curled around the napkin in her lap. "I had nothing to do with that." The words left her mouth before she even thought them through, but even to her own ears, they sounded weak. Ethan tilted his head slightly, watching her. "Didn't you?" He let the question sit between them, the weight of it pressing into her chest. "You enjoyed the benefits, didn't you? The money, the lifestyle? And you never asked where it all came from? Never wondered what happened to the people your husband stepped over to get there?" Her jaw tightened. "That's not fair." For the first time, something flickered across Ethan's face. Amusement. Almost pity. "Fair." He let out a quiet chuckle. "That's a word people like you only use when the rules aren't working in your favor." The words landed like a slap. The restaurant was dead silent now. People weren't just watching. They were listening. Vanessa could feel their eyes on her, the weight of their stares pressing in from all sides. The same people who would have once admired her, envied her, wanted to be her, were now seeing her differently. And for the first time in her life, Vanessa wasn't sure she liked what they saw. Vanessa's grip on her napkin tightened, her nails pressing into the fabric. She wasn't used to this, being on the receiving end of scrutiny. She had spent her life in rooms filled with powerful men, watching them dictate the course of things, watching them decide who mattered and who didn't. But tonight, she wasn't the one in control. She exhaled, forcing herself to sit up straighter. "I came here for dinner," she said, her voice measured. "Not a history lesson." Ethan exhaled, a quiet laugh. It wasn't cruel, but it wasn't kind either. He regarded her for a long moment before speaking. "You think this is about history?" He shook his head slightly. "This isn't history, Vanessa. It's your present. Right now, in this moment, you are exactly who you've always been. The same woman who can walk into a room and decide, in an instant, that someone is beneath her." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "You're twisting this into something it isn't." Ethan's gaze didn't waver. "Am I?" His voice was quiet, but it carried weight. "Tell me, what exactly made you decide? Daniel wasn't experienced enough? Was it his posture? His service? Or was it something else?" Heat crawled up Vanessa's neck. A sharp, sinking sensation settled in her stomach. "I don't have to explain myself to you." Ethan nodded slightly. "No, you don't." A pause. "But for the first time, someone is asking you to." Silence stretched between them, heavier than anything that had been said before. Daniel, the waiter she had dismissed so effortlessly, passed by their table. And for the first time, Vanessa looked at him, really looked at him. Not as a fixture, in the background, not as someone whose sole purpose was to serve her, but as a person. The realization tasted bitter. Ethan pushed his chair back and stood, adjusting his sleeve one final time. "Enjoy your meal," he said simply. Then, he turned and walked away. Vanessa sat frozen, the weight of the moment pressing against her chest. She could feel it, the finality of it, the uncomfortable truth she couldn't escape. For the first time in her life, she wasn't sure what to do next. Vanessa sat there, motionless. The restaurant buzzed softly around her, but the world felt distant, muffled, like she was hearing everything from underwater. Her fingers, still gripping the napkin, slowly relaxed. She had walked in here tonight, certain of who she was, certain of her place in the world. But now she wasn't so sure. She reached for her water glass again, not out of thirst, but to steady herself. The liquid swirled slightly as she lifted it, her grip a little too tight. She took a sip, forcing herself to hold her posture, to maintain the illusion that she was unaffected. But the illusion was shattered the moment she set the glass down, with deliberate care. Ethan Carter had left her with something she couldn't ignore, a mirror she had spent years avoiding, the kind that didn't just reflect back what she wanted to see, But what was actually there? She had spent a lifetime moving through spaces where she dictated the rules, where her words carried weight, where people bent to her will without hesitation. But tonight, for the first time, she had been made to look at herself through the eyes of others, and she didn't like what she saw. Vanessa exhaled slowly, her gaze flickering toward the door where Ethan had disappeared. Some lessons in life come softly. Others arrive like a force of nature, impossible to ignore. She had been given a choice: continue pretending, or finally face the truth. And the hardest part? The truth had been there all along. How often do we move through life without questioning the impact of our words, our actions, our assumptions? How many times have we ignored the discomfort of reflection simply because it's easier to pretend we have nothing to learn? What do you think Vanessa should do next? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if this story made you think, if it stirred something in you, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that challenge the way we see the world. Because sometimes, the hardest truths are the ones that push us toward change.